Hi, I'm Matt Needham, and this is my lecture on refrigerants and the environment. We're going to start off by talking about global warming for a little bit because it's certainly in the last 10-15 years been a very big issue for people and understanding what it is and how refrigerants come into play as far as global warming. But I'll give you kind of a basic understanding the way I see it about global warming, why it's an issue, and how we can have our part in recovering refrigerant and helping to protect the environment. Let's start off here with our globe, and we know that the Earth produces fossil fuels, and when we say fossils, we mean dead animals, mainly plants, even dinosaurs, and that the Earth has been taking all of these carbon life forms and they've been buried, and the wind has eroded the mountains and the Earth has piled up and the pressure has increased. And for about the last 300 million years, we've made the oil deposits, the natural gas deposits, and the coal deposits, which those are the three big ones that we think of when we say fossil fuels, that there were carbon life forms that died, got compressed, and over millions of years formed these deposits in the Earth. And it was buried under the Earth. And sometimes some of the oil would come bubbling up or whatnot, but the majority of the oil has been, up to even more than a mile deep under the Earth, and people have drilled for it, and etc. So let's talk about why it's an issue for the environment with global warming. What does global warming mean? And another term for global warming is the greenhouse effect. Well, what does that mean, the greenhouse effect? Well, if the outside air temperature on a sunny day is 80 degrees, and it stays 80 degrees, and you go and park your car in a big parking lot and go shopping at the supermarket for an hour and a half, and it's still been about 80 degrees outside air temperature in the shade, and your windows were rolled up, when you come back in to your car, is your car 80 degrees inside if the sun's been beating on your car? No, it's not. It's much higher, maybe even over 100 degrees, and that's sort of the greenhouse effect, in that a lot of times we can grow tropical plants and things of this nature in greenhouses where we have a layer of glass that allows the sunlight to come in but then trap that heat. And that's what we have here, is a picture of the Earth, and from the sun we get shortwave radiation coming to the Earth, and then when it hits the Earth, as soon as it hits a solid object, it starts re-radiating some of that heat back out, and even, in a sense, back out to outer space. And when this side of the Earth is away from the sun, we lose a lot of heat to outer space in the form of long-wave radiation. It converts it into long-wave radiation. Just like your car parked in that parking lot, the sunlight will come through the windows and the windshield, the back window, etc., hit your dashboard, hit your steering wheel, your seats, etc., and it hits that, and then that heat tries to escape, but then the glass, which allowed the shortwave radiation to come in, blocks it, and the temperature of the car goes up, just like the temperature of our planet is going up. And that we're always in this balance of, we take a certain amount of heat from the sun, and then the dark side gives that off to outer space at night. But since we've released greenhouse gases, it's like putting an extra little layer of glass over our planet so that you get that sunlight in. See how I'm baking the pole of the Earth right now? And it doesn't re-escape, and so the temperature on the top of this globe, even right now, is raising up a degree or two. And you can see that because I put this layer of glass, this pie pan, over the top of the North Pole. Now, the fossil fuels, again, the three fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, when you burn them, their biggest emission is carbon dioxide. On average, for the three, it's around 75% of the emissions, and things change state when you burn them, and puts off carbon dioxide. And there's a lot of carbon dioxide from all the plants and everything that are going into the environment. There's this huge balance that's occurred that have kept the Earth somewhat stable in temperature. And there's all kinds of things like refrigerants, which there's such a tiny quantity of refrigerant compared to carbon dioxide. And we'll get into how refrigerant by weight is worse than carbon dioxide for sure. But there's millions of times, billions of times more carbon dioxide certainly than there is refrigerants on the planet. And so we've had this natural balance occurring. So people, like, are humans responsible for contributing now to global warming? Well, I'll give you kind of a simple explanation for that. So for about 300 million years, plants mainly would die and be covered along with the dinosaurs that went extinct, 65 million years ago. And then other animals, etc., and they were covered and pressurized and turned into these fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, and oil deposits in different parts of the earth. Okay, and that was all buried there and very carbon rich. And then all of a sudden, in the past 120 years or so, we've taken about half of those fossil fuels. You could almost say, nobody knows exactly, but maybe like 150 million years of deposit of fossil fuels, and shocked it back to the atmosphere, shocked it back to the troposphere where we live, creating that extra layer of glass over the planet. So we had this delicate balance of carbon dioxide, and you think we would end up with a problem if we took 300, half of what it took the Earth 300 million years to make the fossil fuels, and now we've taken at least half of that and shocked it back in the Earth in this tiny little window of about 120 years. And that's why the thought is that man contributes to global warming. So they look at different ways to cut down. And really, in the long term with humanity, we have to go to renewables. Whether people believe in global warming being man-made or not, we still, irregardless, have to go to renewables because we are running out of fossil fuels. That's why they say renewables, things that are really constantly there for the foreseeable future: the sun, solar panels, windmills, waves from the ocean, different things like this that we can count on to be there, because there is only so much coal, and there is only so much oil, and there is only so much natural gas, and we've been using it up at such a drastic rate, especially in the last 50, 60 years as a planet. We've just been using more and more of these carbon-based fuels and shocking the atmosphere with that, and of course we're going to have some reaction to that as a planet. And the planet's a lot like an organism, in that if you have a low-grade fever, maybe a degree and a half above normal, and you're a little bit sick, right? That's not right. You're not able to achieve as much or do as much. And the same thing with the planet. The average temperature is going up for the planet as we speak, and will continue to do so. We know that. So we're trying to take measures to cut down on that. And one of the things that we want to do as air conditioning and refrigeration people is to be careful with refrigerants. And certainly as an individual, we want to cut down on our carbon footprint, and you should look into that. But also, we don't want to just vent refrigerants. And I certainly in the past was as guilty as anyone. I started in the trade at the age of 17, got my first job at 18, in 1983, 1984. Back then, there was no recovery. It was just venting 10, 20, 100 pounds of refrigerant, just depending on the job. And there was no thought given to that contributing to global warming. And also, we'll get into ozone depletion. So that's a little overview of global warming and why it's an issue now. And again, let me emphasize, global warming happens here in the troposphere where we live. We live in the troposphere from sea level, the first 7 miles up, everything you do, even flying an airplane, the troposphere. We live in the troposphere, and the greenhouse gases that we produce at ground level don't really and affect and create that layer of glass in a sense in that first 7 miles. Now, ozone depletion is another story altogether. Ozone depletion doesn't happen in the troposphere. It happens in the stratosphere, which is that 7 miles up to 30 miles above the Earth. And really the ozone layer is at its prime there at 28 miles above the Earth. So the first issue for the air conditioning refrigeration industry in the early 90s was this idea that, hey, refrigerants, we can't just vent them anymore. They're causing holes in the ozone layer. It was the chlorine, answer to a quiz question, the chlorine in the refrigerants that we used that was scavenging oxygen out of the ozone and creating holes in the ozone layer, allowing UV rays to come in and damage the planet. And actually, as a planet, we did a very good job in getting together with the Montreal Protocol, etc., and saying we're going to phase out these refrigerants, which we're still just doing now. I mean, even up till recently, a year or two ago, you could still buy a jug of R22 to work on equipment. They stopped selling equipment with R22 in 2011, stopped making equipment in 2010. But there's still a lot of R22 out there that has some of that chlorine, believe it or not, because it was incredible refrigerant that did it all. The only one that did it all for us: low temperature freezers, medium temperature, air conditioning, R22. So there's a lot of it still out there. In the stratosphere, we have the ozone layer, and we've been trying to get rid of these refrigerants, these chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs. We got rid of those first, R11, R12. R11 had 3 atoms of chlorine, R12, 2 atoms of chlorine. Very bad for the ozone layer. And then we made a good decision. Okay, get rid of those first. Now, R22, the other big one, huge one, only 1 atom of chlorine and didn't even damage the ozone 5% per weight as much as those other ones. And so now we're totally phasing that out, getting rid of the R22, and we've had to replace R22 with a number of other refrigerants like 410A for air conditioning and 404A for freezers, etc., and some 134A systems. Now, let's talk here a little bit about these CFCs. Again, chlorofluorocarbons, 2 or 3 atoms of chlorine, bad for the ozone layer. Don't really use those much anymore. Hydrochlorofluorocarbons, the big 800-pound gorilla for the HCFCs is R22, which I just talked about, really being phased out now. There's a lot of interim refrigerants, though. Some of the 400 series, things like you may have heard of, Hot Shot or MP39 401A, that a lot of these are actually about, even though they're still available, 50% R22, because they're like, well, hey, it's such a great refrigerant, let's just have less of it. So it's still out there. And then HFC, hydrofluorocarbons. Now, this is the newer refrigerants that came out in the 90s that don't hurt the ozone layer at all, and that are very popular. And the 3 most popular would be R134A, which is used in medium temperature, some low temperature, not much, car air conditioning, refrigeration. Some centrifugal chillers will use R134A. It doesn't hurt the ozone at all, but it does contribute to global warming. Another one of the HFC would be 404A, which is for low temperature freezers. And low temperature freezers, 404A, actually that one's the worst, just about the worst one for global warming potential. And then we also have 410A, which doesn't hurt the ozone layer at all and is by far the most popular new refrigerant that has gone into systems currently being sold now in the end of 2020 and 2015 and even back for a long time. It's been 410A dominating the package type air conditioning systems, not your centrifugal chillers though. And now we have, and again, the difference here is these two contribute to global warming and ozone depletion. We changed to these HFCs, which only contribute to global warming, which we want to start making changes on, but not to ozone depletion. And then HFOs, hydrofluoroolefins, these are popular refrigerants that are coming out now that don't hurt the ozone layer and very minimal effect on the global warming potential, but they are slightly flammable, so that's a consideration. And then HCs are hydrocarbons. These are just like methane, butane, propane, and they are flammable, but again, they don't contribute to ozone depletion, and they have very low global warming potential. So let's talk for a minute now about our global warming potential here, okay? So it's kind of based on, from my other lectures you may have heard, like specific heat of water is 1. It's all kind of based on that, and then the other things are compared to it. With global warming potential, for by weight, a certain amount, we use carbon dioxide, CO2, as the standard. So, and again, there's billions and trillions of times more carbon dioxide really than there is quantity of refrigerants in cylinders, in systems, in the atmosphere. So CO2 has a global warming potential of 1. Compared to the same amount, R134A has 1,430. Again, R404A 3922, R410A 2088. And that's why we're looking at replacing these refrigerants. No, those 3 don't hurt the ozone, but they do contribute to global warming. So we're looking for other options now. And one of those would be the HFO R1234YF, which incidentally is what I have in my car as a refrigerant. And it has a global warming potential of only 4. No ozone depletion, slightly flammable, but I haven't been in an accident in my car yet. Okay, so, we'll find out about that. So we're making changes. We're looking at new refrigerants. They're coming out all the time. And we also have the oils that go with the refrigerants. Older systems like chlorofluorocarbons and hydrochlorofluorocarbons would use mineral oil or alkybenzene. Ester oils are very popular for the newer refrigerants now. Let's talk a little bit about recovery, recycle, and reclaim. It's important as air conditioning refrigeration technicians that we don't just vent the refrigerant, that we, if it can be reused for the same customer, that we take it out and store it and then put it back in those systems so that it's not just being vented to the atmosphere. If it's a corrupted refrigerant that has acid in it because of a burnout or something like that, a lot of times we have to turn it into a parts house in order for it to be destroyed. And the idea with the recovery cylinders, the gray and yellow recovery cylinders, is that at some point the refrigerant in the systems, in the recovery cylinders, must be transported to a parts house or whatever at some point. So that's where DOT comes involved. The Department of Transportation gets involved in regulating those cylinders. Recycle is where you take it out and you put it through some process to clean it up. Kind of what they have in an auto repair place, where they bring the R2D2 machine, roll it right out, because all the vehicles come to them. It's a bigger, taller, heavier machine than a lot of times your little 20-pound recovery machine. And it'll put it through a couple filter dryers. It gets the oil out, takes the air, blows it off the top. I used to have one of these that I would cycle my refrigerant through, and it was kind of neat. And I felt like it cleaned it up a lot. And I was able to put it back a little cleaner in my systems. But then reclaim means you bring it back to a new standard by taking a refrigerant, turning it into a parts house. They send it out to be reprocessed. Okay, so those are the terms recovery, recycle, and reclaim. Now let's talk for just a minute about some of these newer refrigerants, the R400 series. This is a blend of older refrigerants put together to make a new refrigerant like 410A or 404A. And because they're older refrigerants, when you put them together, when they're in a vaporous form, they tend to fractionate and try and go back into their original states, which is an issue. So we generally recommend that we charge these in a liquid state so that they go in their proper mixture. And that concludes my lecture on refrigerants and the environment.